"Look at her clothes. She doesn't belong here," one officer sneered, his voice loud enough for the whole crowd to hear. Another chuckled, shaking his head. A black woman stood frozen, her dignity under attack, as uniformed men in power laughed at her like she was invisible. But she wasn't just anyone. She carried a truth that could silence every insult in an instant. What could make these officers regret every word? And how could a single revelation flip the balance of power so completely? Stay with me, because this story will leave you stunned. She wasn't just another face in the crowd. Her name was Judge Williams, a woman who had spent years breaking barriers in a world that rarely opened its doors to someone who looked like her. In the courtroom, her voice carried weight, her rulings shaped lives, her words commanded respect. But outside those polished walls, she was simply a black woman moving through the world, often unseen for who she truly was. That morning she chose something simple, a quiet walk through her neighborhood, no robe, no title, no entourage, just herself. People passed her without a second glance, but the uniformed men on the corner saw her differently. They didn't see the authority, the years of study, or the history she represented. All they saw was someone they thought they could belittle. And that moment, so ordinary at first, was about to explode into something unforgettable. Judge Williams had grown used to the small slights, being ignored in line at a store, strangers questioning her authority when she spoke with certainty. But that day, what began as a simple walk quickly twisted into something sharper, something crueler. Two officers leaned against their cruiser, eyes narrowing as she passed. "Hey, you lost," one called out, his tone dripping with mockery. She paused, unsure if the question deserved an answer, but before she could move on, the second officer chuckled. "Maybe she thinks she's somebody important." The words stung, not because she hadn't heard worse, but because they came from men who wore the badge, men sworn to protect. She straightened her posture, quietly refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. But they didn't stop. "Look at those shoes," one scoffed. "Bet she can't even afford a cab, let alone live around here." The laughter that followed rang louder than the cars on the street. People nearby glanced quickly and then looked away. Silence was safer than standing up. William's heart pounded. She had the authority, the title, the power. But in that moment, stripped of her robe and courtroom, she was just a black woman facing open ridicule. She considered speaking, but another taunt cut through the air. "Don't bother, lady, nobody's listening." The cruelty wasn't just in the words, but in the certainty behind them, the smug belief that they could say anything without consequence. And that belief fueled every insult, each one heavier than the last. Her fingers curled into fists at her side. She had spent her life fighting to be respected in spaces that were never built for her. And now, in the middle of a sidewalk, those battles returned in the ugliest way. What the officers didn't know, what they couldn't even imagine, was that every second they mocked her, they were digging themselves into a hole far deeper than they realized. The truth of who she was wasn't just powerful. It was about to flip the entire encounter on its head. But how do you reveal your identity when the world has already decided not to see you? The laughter reached its peak when one of the officers stepped closer, circling her like she was prey. "You think you're too good to answer us?" he sneered. His partner smirked, adding, "Probably just another nobody passing through." For a moment, Judge Williams stayed silent, her chest rising with the weight of every insult. She had faced discrimination before, but rarely so naked, so public. The sting wasn't just in their words, it was in their certainty, their unshakable belief that she had no power, no voice. Then, in a calm, measured tone sharpened by years on the bench, she finally spoke. "Is this how you treat all citizens, or just the ones who look like me?" The shift was instant. The crowd nearby froze. The officers faltered, exchanging uneasy glances, but one, desperate to keep control, scoffed again. "And what are you gonna do about it?" That was the moment she chose to reveal the truth. Slowly, deliberately, she reached into her bag and pulled out her identification, federal credentials, stamped with authority they couldn't deny. She held it up, her eyes locked on theirs. "My name," she said firmly, "is Judge Williams, Federal Court." The words sliced through the air like a gavel striking wood. Silence fell heavy, their mocking grins collapsed, replaced by wide-eyed panic. The power dynamic flipped in an instant, leaving them scrambling for words. The crowd, once quiet, leaned in. Whispers rippled through the street. The very people who had turned away now watched, wide-eyed, as the officers stood exposed, no longer in control, no longer untouchable. Judge Williams didn't need to raise her voice. Her presence, her truth, was enough to shatter their arrogance. And yet, even in their shame, the bigger question lingered. Why did it take a title, a badge of authority, for them to see her humanity? The officers, suddenly humbled, stumbled over apologies. Their laughter had vanished, replaced with nervous stammers. But Judge Williams didn't need their excuses. She had already seen the truth, the mask slipping, the arrogance exposed. She turned, credentials still in hand, and walked away with the kind of dignity they had tried so hard to strip from her. But the weight of the moment lingered. Yes, her authority had silenced them. Yet deep inside, she knew the reality. Had she not carried that badge of power, their mockery might have continued or escalated. It wasn't respect for her humanity that stopped them. It was fear of her title. And that truth cuts deeper than any insult. Because this story isn't just about one woman or one incident. It's about the countless others who don't have federal credentials to shield them. The ones whose dignity is dismissed, whose voices are ignored simply because of the color of their skin. Their stories don't always end in silence and shame for the oppressors. Too often, they end in pain. So what do we take from this? That respect should never be conditional. That humanity shouldn't depend on a robe, a title, or a badge. Judge Williams walked away stronger, her identity undeniable. But the question remains for all of us. Why must someone prove their worth to be treated with basic decency? And maybe the harder question, when we see injustice unfolding in front of us, do we stay silent like the crowd, or do we speak? The next time you witness racism, what will you do?